Hi, I'm Dave Freeman. I'm a developer relations engineer for the Enyo and Open WebOS teams at HP, and I'm here to talk to you today about the Enyo framework. I know I've seen a couple of stickers on a few pieces of hardware, so I know some of you guys have probably heard me talk about this before, or at least are a little bit familiar with our framework. But with that said, let me get started right here with a brief history lesson about how we got where we are. So if anyone's familiar with the company Palm, created the PDAs, and then back in 2009 they came out with this WebOS operating system for a mobile phone called the Pre. We had a JavaScript framework called Mojo that was supposed to let developers easily create these HTML5, JavaScript, CSS3 applications to run on their WebOS devices. It wasn't quite as easy as they had originally envisioned it. It was created by some Java guys, so it was pretty cumbersome to learn, especially for someone like me. I didn't have any experience at all developing any kind of web applications or JavaScript, so trying to learn JavaScript through the Mojo framework was challenging, but it did teach me a lot. So what they did, one of the first things they did to make it a little bit easier was created a web-based IDE called Aries, and it basically would wrap up a bunch of these components that looked like Mojo controls and then would overlay your Mojo code on them. Also a little cumbersome, a little slow, but it did work and people loved it. So then what happened was HP purchased Palm and decided to come out with a tablet called the Touchpad. And they found out that Mojo didn't really scale well to the new larger viewports on the tablet. So they said, we need to come up with something better. Oh, hey, by the way, we came up with this really awesome component architecture in Aries to enable this web IDE. Why don't we leverage that for a new framework for developers to use? And that's what Enyo 1 became. Enyo 1 was originally only geared to run on the WebKit that was shipping on the Touchpad. It has also since been open sourced, even though we're not really developing on it anymore. If you've got some Enyo 1 apps and want to put it on some other browser, you're free to do that now. And now we've got Enyo 2, which was redesigned from the ground up to be cross-platform and cross-browser. So what that means is we can run the same web app basically as a native application on, in a desktop browser, on iOS devices, on Android devices, and of course the touchpad. So it's basically trying to get to that goal of write your web app one time and deploy it on pretty much everything that's out there right now. Okay, so that's my brief history lesson. What is Enyo? Kind of touched on this already. It's a truly cross-platform and open source app dev framework. It's Apache 2.0 license. All of our development is done in the open on GitHub. You're free to fork it, do whatever you want. You can make your own proprietary copy, or what we really like is for people to contribute back into the project. So I've got a slide on that a little bit later. Enables native quality apps depending on the power of the browser that's going to be on that particular mobile device or desktop system. We're still going to be a little bit limited to the JavaScript interpreter, but basically using something like PhoneGap is how we would deliver that native experience, on iOS or Android to run as an app instead of being just run in the browser. Again, JavaScript supports whatever the engine is going to support, HTML5, CSS3, available on that particular platform. Enyo is lightweight and fast. I think currently the core pieces, the core framework minified and gzipped clocks in right around 30K, so it's, for what it does, it's a pretty small, lightweight framework. It's extensible, and we are building our developer community. We already have a pretty rabid set of loyal developers that have been sticking with WebOS since it came out, and they love Enyo. Built to manage complexity via our component model, and I'll get into some of that here in a couple of slides. What do we got here? Also, this is a new slide deck that they unveiled on me on the plane yesterday, so I've kind of mixed and mashed some of my other ones in here. So I'm ad hocing this for you guys today. Again, why would you use Enyo? Proven technology, JavaScript, ECMAScript 5, HTML5, CSS3. Our framework is free for you to use, like I said. Develop your apps across multiple platforms. We'll run on all types of devices. And, Palm, the DNA that's still around in our group, we really embrace open web standards, and we want to, push that to to the rest of the world and make it easier for developers to get, like I said, get their apps deployed on as many, faces as they possibly can. Let's see, what do we got here? Oh, the how. So this is a slide I reused from my old deck. How do you enable developers to rapidly create compelling applications? One of the things that HP did whenever they were coming up with the touchpad is said, we want to have 500 tablet optimized apps at launch. All right, well, this is coming from nothing, right? So how do we do that? Enyo is how we did it. And how do you enable developers that aren't necessarily HTML and CSS experts to have them make nice looking, compelling apps? Enyo is the answer. So how does Enyo actually work? We have a component model that keeps your things encapsulated and very modular, so you can mix and match components into other apps. You can take it at an expanded level. You can actually design an entire app that maybe you would think of it as a widget perhaps, but it's actually an app that would run in a div on an existing web page. You can just render directly into an existing element on some other part. It's very flexible on how we can use this, but the component architecture is what really sets us apart, I think. So you can see some pieces here. We've got the core, which is the basic application framework that provides the component system and the encapsulation and the events and some basic elements. We have an extra library called Layout that provides some more responsive layout designs, like with panels and a more toolbar kind of system. Our widget set is called Onyx, and we have Aries 2 is being actively developed right now. It's on the GitHub as well. It's not ready for production use, but you're free to check out that project and see how far we've come. I actually need to do that myself. Mark has been doing a lot of great work with the Grenoble team for Aries. So as part of that responsive stuff, we do have a few components that are geared for responsive design. Most notably would be the panels kind that we have that is smart about viewport size and will switch to a single pane type of view if you're on a phone browser or on you've switched over to portrait mode and back to landscape, it'll go out to your multi-pane view, so it's automatic. You don't have to do any coding for that. We have a more toolbar kind that's really simple. Any buttons that are up in the toolbar, if they won't fit because your viewport's too small, it'll push them all into another div and make it be an ellipsis button as a drop-down list. So we'd give you a couple of little tools to do some responsive stuff to go to those smaller devices. Who do we support browser-wise? Pretty much anything with a modern web runtime. If it supports HTML5 and CSS3 and ECMAScript 5, you can run your Enyo 2 app on it. Coming soon, Windows 8, we're working with Microsoft teams to make sure that Enyo apps are running smoothly in IE10 and on the new platforms that we just heard about from the previous speaker. BlackBerry 10 as well. I want to talk to Dave Ballmer later today about that, since I know that that's happening too. All right, now we'll get back into some of the slides that I've delivered before. So I've broken it out a little bit into what is in the core of the Enyo framework. There's boot, which gives us our package management and dependency system, kernel, and I was going to sing OOP, it's magic, All right, in the kernel, DOM for, DOM pieces, the basic set of things like buttons and checkboxes, inputs, stuff like that. Ajax, obviously, we need to be web connected. We're coming from WebOS. We have straight up XHR and JSONP that you can use. UI, again, I guess DOM is actually the DOM rendering engine, and the UI piece of core is what gives you your basic elements. And then the touch part of core is where our high performance scroller is, and touchscreen support. All right, so a little bit more about what these things are. So packaging and dependencies, very simple. We have a method called depends, Enyo.depends, and you just pass it a string of strings that represent the files that you want to load. And in this example, I'm loading up my main app.js. I'll have all my main app logic and components that I want to render, a CSS file. And that one, the last one, the lib Onyx, is a convention that we have where wherever you load the Enyo.js script from, whatever directory that Enyo.js file is in, you need to have a sibling directory named lib, and that's where our additional libraries go, like Onyx and layout. And so the $lib is just a shortcut for the package manager to say, where did I load Enyo from? Look at that same part of the tree for the lib directory, and then load up Onyx. Another thing about the package file, so the first two are actual files. The lib Onyx, that's a directory. So in the Onyx directory, you would find another package.js file with an Enyo depends that then loads up all of the things for it. So it's, pretty simplistic management system, but it does the job, and you can, really control which parts of your code need to load which, dependencies. All right. From the kernel and OOP side, we have the concept of the kind. So you can basically think of a kind as a class, but class is a reserved word in JavaScript, so we've come up with kind. And the Enyo.kind method is a constructor factory that will let you create new kinds and then instantiate them later. So I stole this example from our lead architect because I thought it was hilarious. I'm going to make a new kind called Firefly, and I'm extending an already existing kind called television show. This is how you can, enhance existing kinds. We call that the super kind. In this case, the super kind is the television show. I'm going to have a function for my Firefly called show, and whenever I run it, I'm going to play this little video. Now, another interesting thing there, the first line is this inherited arguments, or this dot inherited, and I'm passing it the arguments array. What that tells me is that the superkind television show already has a show function. And since I'm specifying one in my new kind, I'm basically overriding that. But if I want the superkind's function to also run, I just call this dot inherited and pass it the arguments array. You'll see that pattern a lot if you start digging into Enyo and you're making your own custom kinds. I end up overriding create all the time. So it's always create function, this dot inherited arguments, and then do my stuff. All right, and so then there's the example. After I've run the Enyo kind method and I have this Firefly kind, I make a new one, and then I wait 10 weeks and then I delete it. What's funny is I had never actually watched that show until, I don't know, maybe a year ago, and I was homesick and my wife was out of town, and so I watched it in 2 days on Netflix. It's like, this is a really good show. All right. Part of the core, basically Enyo.object is the lowest level that we start building everything else off of. And the Enyo.object provides this thing called the publish property mechanism. And so what that means is I can specify a published property in my kind, and every property that's in there, it gets automatic setter and getter methods. So in this case, I'd have an automatic function available to me called set product ID and get product ID. I can also provide a changed function that will run every time I run set product ID, and the value actually changes. It does have some smarts in it where if I run set product ID, but I don't actually change the value to a new value, it won't run the changed function. You can force it to do that by overriding it by creating your own set product ID changed function here, run this dot inherited arguments, and then manually call this dot product ID changed and force it that way. Next up from object is component, and component is where we get our Enyo events and our encapsulation system. Encapsulation just means I can have a component that contains other components. All right. So my example here is I'm making a new kind called Sith Lord. It's extending Jedi, and then to say that it's going to have events, I just provide an events block, right? And then I have to name my events on something, right? So all events need to be named on whatever, okay? Whenever I want to send that event, I run do speak, right? Or do whatever the name of my event is, all right? Now, the next page, we'll see a little bit better how this all works. All right, so for the encapsulation stuff, now this is showing an example where I have a collection of these kinds, right? So I have a kind, Sith Lords. Its components block will list other Enyo kinds. Kind Sith Lord, kind Sith Lord, kind Sith Lord. Now listen, Darth Vader is the only one I'm listening for the on speak event, right? And whenever I get it, I'm gonna run this listen to toys function. If I come back over here real quick, if you look at what do I do whenever I'm sending that event, do speak, I'm just sending it whatever data I want as a JavaScript object that I can then access in the event itself, right? So I'm just gonna alert whatever I say scream. Scream this, It's going to do the do speak and send the message value to the listener. All right, and here's an example of scripting a little thing with the Sith Lords. But what's important here is this thing called the $hash. To access components inside of a component, it's in this thing called the $hash. It's a shortcut to the components block. All right, so in your internal kind code, you can access things like, I'd be able to say this $, Sith Lord 1, Sith Lord 2, whatever. But outside, if I'm just making these objects and dealing with them in script nodes or whatever, I can access them and say, oh, make a new Sith Lords. I know it has a components block in it that's got a name Darth Vader, so toys.$.Darth Vader is who I'm setting that variable to. And then you can see it's not in there, but we'll just pretend that there was a published property called weapon. I'm going to set weapon to lightsaber, throw the Palpatine Sith Lord and scream, no! Again, another example from our hilarious lead architect, Ben. All right. DOM events, another part of the core. I was just talking about Enyo events, custom Enyo events, but we can hook all of the standard DOM events into the Enyo event system, and that's handled by dispatcher.js. You don't have to do anything. It's just there. It's part of the core. All right, next up from component would be Enyo.control. Now, component doesn't actually render anything in the DOM. It's just a thing. It provides you the ability to encapsulate other components in this event thing. If you actually want to, show something to someone, then you would use an Enyo.control. And Enyo.control actually extends an abstract kind called UI component, which is an extension of component. So I just kind of left that part out. You don't really drive UI component yourself too much unless you have some really specific needs and you need to create your own rendering block of some kind. But again, very simple example. I'm making a new kind called bumper sticker. I'm telling it that it's an Enyo control. Now, I don't actually have to do that. By default, if you don't specify the super kind in your kind definition, it becomes an Enyo.control. Right? Same thing for tag. This is just here as an illustration. The default tag is always div, but I can change it to whatever I want. If I want it to be a span or a break, whatever, I can change the tag. And this is very simple. I'm just providing it content this time instead of a component that's got another content defined in it. And then I can do inline styles by specifying a style string. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can deal with custom styles or CSS, etc. This is one way. And then to actually get it in the page, in the viewport, I make a new bumper sticker, and then I'm running the render into method. There are two different ways to actually render these things. And render into will take any element. Right? So what you'll see a lot of if you're doing a full viewport app, you just render into document body. Right? But you can render into any element. Right? Any other div that you have a reference to, you can render into that. Now there's also the write method, and that will just write it inline. So like if you're doing Enyo kind construction in, say, like a script node on a static HTML page, then you run .write, and it will just render it inline at that spot where the node is, or where the script node is. All right, so that was pretty much the high points of the core framework. On that earlier slide, you saw we have the layout library, and this is what gives us some responsive app layout stuff. And these are the main pieces of layout. Enyo.fittables is apparent to fittable rows and fittable columns, and it's kind of our answer to the fact that not all browsers support flexboxes. In Enyo 1, I was really spoiled with Flexbox because the touchpad WebKit supported it. It's really easy to do, these awesome centered things and with Flexboxes. Well, we don't have that ability anymore, so we have a kind called fittables that gives you that fittable rows and fittable columns. It's not exactly the same as Flexbox, but you can still get some really nice app layouts with the basic fittable stuff. Enyo.list is part of the layout library. And we have a couple of different strategies for list-like things, but the actual list kind is a high-performance scrolling list to have simple, controls rendered into it. I think that says thousands of items, but I've seen test code where the default length of items of the list was like 2 million, and you can sit there and just scroll through the whole thing without any lagging. We do like a one-page render and a one page of data waiting to be scrolled in, and keep it that way so that we aren't constantly sitting around with 2 million DOM nodes in memory. Enyo panels, I kind of mentioned that. That's my flagship go-to responsive design kind to show the neatness of going from these multi-panels on a tablet down to a single panel that's swipeable on a mobile device. And then Enyo node is a very simple collapsible tree view of whatever you throw at it, and it'll have other nodes in it that will also be collapsible. I'm already going over time. Not yet, almost. All right, Onyx is our widget set. I'm not going to read them all to you. Core just provides, like I said, some really basic stuff, buttons, inputs, checkboxes, but Onyx gives us a lot more widgets, and they're generally a combination of regular controls, CSS, and JavaScript. So we call them composite controls, and we package them up in the Onyx widget library. Today, we're going to have Enyo 2.1 released, and it has a new theming system where we've gone back and made all of the Onyx widgets be based on less, so you can go in and modify the theming for Onyx to make it look like whatever you want using less. All right, if you've got connectivity and you want to check out the sampler, it's online at enyo.js.com/sampler. You can see a bunch of cool stuff. I can show you real quick here at the end of the slides what it looks like, but it's got things for the core, for the layout libraries, for Onyx, and it's even got a little, OK playground feature where you can write some Enyo code and have it render in a thing. But the best thing to do is go to JS Fiddle, because we are on JS Fiddle for the Enyo library. We've got a bunch of other samples and examples at the docs URL. And then we're encouraging people to get involved. Try it out. I'm confident that once you've written an app or two in Enyo, or just kind of played around with it, you'll really get the feel for how powerful it can be and what it can do for you or your organization to get, like I said, to get those apps or whatever functionality you want to put in your Enyo kind out to as many platforms and devices as you possibly can. What else? Yes, contributions. I did mention this. Our GitHub organization is Enyo.js, and the main Enyo project is at Enyo. We also have other projects. That's where you see the Aries project, and the sampler app is there as well for you to fork and learn from. And then contribute. We'd love to have the community help us make our framework better. And whenever they recognize things that could be done better, we definitely listen and work with them to get those pull requests in. I have a couple of marketing slides that they gave me last night. We have a couple of success stories of companies that are using Enyo. OpenBravo recently released their OpenBravo mobile application, which is, I believe, an entry point into their web-based POS system, and they wrote it in Enyo. So there's a nice little quote for showing how easy it was for Enyo to be used and how modular it is. Did I skip through? There, yeah. Xtuple. These were the first guys that we kind of convinced to ditch a project and redo it in Enyo. We met with them, we met them at the Fluent conference earlier this year, just before we came out of beta. And after listening to my presentation and coming to talk to us at the booth, they said, hey, I wish we'd known about you guys 6 months ago, because we're in the middle of this rewrite of our CRM product using Sprout Core, and we're really unhappy with what has happened to the Sprout Core community, and there's no direction anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Wish we'd known about you guys, we'd have tried this. So we had a couple of our framework engineers talk to them more in depth, and they agreed to at least give it a shot to see how fast they could, or see what they could do and how fast. And I think it was like 6 weeks later they had done the entire version 2 app in Enyo and said, we're going with this. So we got a nice little write-up from them. Showed you the OpenBravo one. And then this guy, this is just a one-man, well, two-man shop. It's just an independent developer and a designer. He got a lot of WebOS cred back in the Mojo days when he wrote the Foursquare app for WebOS, and he's also got some other apps that he develops for third parties. So he's also waving that Enyo flag. We've got forums, forums.enyojs.com. There's also a blog.enyojs.com. Follow us on Twitter at EnyoJS. And for any kind of general inquiries or press or career questions, then you can email enyojs@palm.com. We are hiring. I know that in developer relations, we've got a handful of positions open. We're also hiring on the core framework team, so if anybody you know or you yourself are really great JavaScript framework guys, send us your resume, and we're growing our team. And that's it. And I think I'm out of time, so I can't show you any the sample stuff, but I've got to leave, but I'll be back later tonight for the beer thing, and I'll also be here tomorrow, so I can show some. If anybody wants to see some stuff, I can show you things.